Welcome back to WISEcast, the podcast for women in STEM and education. I am Dr. Amber Miller.
And I am Dr. Richa Chandra. Today we're discussing how parenting can be your work superpower, which sounds kind of crazy, right? And counterintuitive, but we're probably doing it today. And definitely the guest that we have on this episode sold it, right? She definitely sold it to me. And I'm feeling a little bit more empowered than I maybe did last night or like earlier. But before we get into all of that great stuff, how did you dress for success today, Amber?
Well, I definitely took today's dress for success very literal in terms of superpower action. I'm wearing my Superwoman t-shirt. This might have been from a costume a while back when Addie picked our costumes for Halloween, when we were all kind of the same thing. And so, but I felt like this was very fitting for today's topic episode and really embracing, right, all of because I think we associate so many of the challenges that come with parenting as challenges, right? Because there's so many things to tackle, and we often forget how many lessons, right, those events are teaching us and how applicable, and we just naturally apply them, right, to all the other parts of our lives. And so Superwoman today, I'm trying like you to embrace and channel it and feel better instead of not like I'm getting everything accomplished. But what about you? Dress for success. How did you dress for success today?
So my dress for success is definitely going to be a two-part experience today. But first part, I started off with, so the kids dropping them off at school. It's my son's birthday. So I actually got a little bit of extra time this morning to go for a run. So I'm still sweaty from the run. So it's Nike, just do it, right? Like kind of attitude. And I feel like, you know, in this conversation, this was like such a fitting dress choice because it's, you know, one of the things that we have as our superpowers is that we make every minute count. So I had only 20 minutes, right? Like after drop off and, you know, before doing this recording and, you know, managed to make my coffee. But had I had all the time in the world, maybe I wouldn't have, and I would have put it off. And then you might get lazy on a Friday evening and not get it done. So I actually do feel super powerful with this t-shirt, being sweaty, still got to take a shower, and then be in part two of my dress for success today.
Love it. I love it. We are so excited to be joined by Dr. Ann Welsh today. She is a clinical psychologist, executive coach, and consultant. Dr. Welsh began her career at Harvard before opening her own practice with a focus on supporting women in STEM, healthcare and law, and working parents across career sectors. Her coaching brings together research and real-life experiences to hone leadership skills, improve emotional intelligence, and create work-life integration. She can be found at www.drannwelsh.com. And I can't think of a better resource and woman to join us as we discuss today whether or not parenting can be your superpower. I have to be honest, I feel she might be a little slanted towards the yes column, but for our conversation today.
Yeah, probably a little slanted given I've done it 4 times, so 4 kids, but you know, okay, I'll acknowledge my bias and then table it.
Part of the process, right? But so when I started thinking about this topic and like how parenting or the skills that parenting might give us to make us better at our jobs, like there were some obvious ones that like pinged into my head, like multitasking, right? Like every day, all day, like there's so much going on just in life in general, but then you throw kids into the mix, a spouse into the mix, and it's like a whole new level of like multitasking. And then some other, like the other one, I guess, was that often we are on like a stricter time schedule in terms of if we're the parent responsible for either drop off for school or daycare or pick up from daycare, even if they're like the 6:30 to 6:30 hours that are like amazing for childcare, there's still like that hard cutoff, right? Where you have to be there or else you pay extra money and you get in trouble and all of the things, or your kid may not be able to come back the next day, which is like the most terrible side effect, right? So, but like what other ones or what are your top, you know, kind of skills that parenting bring to us in terms of at the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, and I think those are 2, you know, definite ones. I kind of I call them the 4 Ps of parenting skills that make us better at our jobs. And, you know, the first one is another kind of obvious one, but I think sometimes we forget it, which is just improvements in people skills, right? Our brains are actually prone to learning when we become parents and prone to become more empathic and better read emotions. It's kind of one of the biological shifts we make when we are pregnant. And that actually happens in non-pregnant partners as well. So just having a baby primes your brain to be more empathic. And empathy and emotional intelligence, like all these people skills, right? So that's category one. Communication, like kind of coaching, all of those things fall under the skills that make us better at dealing with people, which is definitely something that's valuable at work. I know we kind of talk about them as the soft skills, and sometimes think of them as hard to teach. They are teachable. We can get better at them, and we do as parents. The second set would be like processing skills. So, I think when you become a parent, it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. You have just constant new information coming at you all the time. And you have to rapidly process it and make decisions. So this category is things like decisiveness, prioritization, being adaptable and flexible. So it's kind of this making my brain work more quickly set of skills. The third P would be productivity. So that's the stuff you were just talking about, right? Like you cannot waste a second when you're a working parent. If I have 5 minutes, I'm probably doing something with it. Even if that something is intentionally resting, I'm intentionally doing something with that time, right? And along with that also comes a degree of patience, right? Being both effective, efficient with our time, and also tolerating that our toddler might take 4 hours to put their shoes on and trying to sit with that. But again, those are things that are really helpful at work too, right? Like if you are, you can't rush an experiment, right? If it's going to take the time it's going to take, and maybe it takes more time than you thought, and you've got to tolerate that. And then the last one, I kind of call perspective taking, but it's what you were talking about in terms of the multitasking and the big picture thinking. It's that like mental load that gets a lot of airplay now, right? Things like anticipating the needs, kind of project management, right? These are all huge tasks at work. And you get a lot of practice at them in parenting too, right? Like if you think about even just taking your kids to the park, you've got to anticipate who's going to be thirsty, who's going to be hungry, what kind of snacks do I need? Do we have Band-Aids in case someone falls? Are we going to get home for naps so that no one falls apart at the playground, right? I kind of thinking ahead to all of this stuff is just another skill set, right? Of being able to look into the future, anticipate all this stuff, and make sure that all of the tasks are taken care of.
So, Anne, so it was interesting when you brought up productivity, because that was one of the things that was on my mind. And you have 4 kids, so I can't even imagine like how divided up your time is throughout the day. But I find myself, yes, I'm more productive for being a parent, but, because I'm efficient, et cetera. But sometimes I wonder, would my output actually be greater if I didn't have so many of these like mental interruptions even, or distractions like Class Dojo going off, or this or that, or I need to do that sign up genius, or, so what are your thoughts about that? Because you brought up productivity as being one of our superpowers, but does it diminish our output?
Yeah, and I think that's such a good question. And one, I should say, one that I don't get a ton, but it seems like an obvious one. And so the way I guess I think about it, and certainly this is where my bias, is going to show, is that it might impact, it might impact how much you do in a given day, but maybe it doesn't impact your success, right? Because being productive and success, output, those are not all the same terms. Those are all different. They all have different meanings. And I'm not just trying to argue semantics, but, I think that effectiveness is really important to think about here, right? Like, again, if we look at it from a science perspective, I could run 20 garbage studies and look like I'm being super productive and getting all this stuff done that really don't tell me anything in the end, because they were just not thought out. And I could run one excellent study that really kind of hones in on my question and get a lot of data from it that's very useful. And so I think that's the thing that starts to happen when you become a working parent, right? Like you cut the fluff. And so, yeah, we're interrupted, and yes, things get in the way, and maybe at the end of the day, the list of what we got done doesn't look quite the same. but we got to the heart of the matter, right? Like we put in the effort to get the 80% that really matters. And that remaining 20% is just kind of the asymptotic stuff at the end that doesn't actually have that great of an impact. So that's the way I think about it. I get that sometimes when you have a manager or a PI that maybe doesn't think about it that way, it can be a little bit of a challenge. But in terms of how internally we can look at it to feel a little bit stronger, I guess.
Yeah, and that's probably with the prioritization that you were bringing up, right? So because it's, not just output, we're tackling the things that actually matter and, have that impact.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and the other piece kind of related to that, I'm blanking, and the name's going to come to me. There's the Pareto principle where it's like 20% of your effort yields 80% of the output, right? It's this idea that if we are intentional about what is yielding results and we just focus on that, the rest really isn't that important. Or the rest can wait.
Yeah, I love this. And one of them, because we do some research before episodes because we like to, like think about the topics and stuff. And one of them that came up that I was not like, I guess I was a little surprised, maybe the right word, shocked kind of, was like that it makes us more ambitious. And I guess again, like the typical perspective is, right, that parenting, like, not dulls your shine, but, kind of like it dampens your ability to do this stuff because you have these additional responsibilities to do. And so I'm curious as to hear like how you think parenting, if you think that as well, like that it makes us more ambitious. I get that some of it is like we're driven to make maybe a different impact, to show kind of like, because we want our children to be proud of us. We want them to see the things that we are doing in a positive light. But do you think like that parenting kind of inherently makes us a little bit more ambitious, or the opposite, right? Because that was one I wasn't, I guess, expecting to see on the lists of things that to pop up.
So I have kind of two thoughts on that. One is, in a really direct way, sometimes I think it does just increase your ambition, in that, especially for those of us maybe that are in careers where we feel like there's a lot of meaning and kind of career salience for us, we can become more ambitious because we want to improve the world that our kids are going to grow up in, right? And so, if I'm, just as a personal example, right? If I'm kind of champion women in STEM, it's partly because I want my kids to grow up in a world where there is no discrimination in the field, right? Where they can all be scientists. But I think the other way to think about it is ambition for what, right? And so maybe ambition becomes a much more nuanced word when we become parents. And so perhaps it's ambition in my career to be fulfilled and ambition for my kids to find their way in the world. And so that shifts what it looks like more so than cutting it or increasing it. Again, it maybe feels like a little bit of a semantics argument, but I think it's actually really important.
Yeah, and I get that too. I guess I think that, as we grow with our children, growing through the different stages of stuff, and mine is still pretty young, so there's just, it's different, than what we experience in our adult work job, like life things. That it's just, we appreciate things differently. So I kind of 100% agree with the semantic shift. I think things that I thought maybe were important when I was younger before I had kids, right? Like, and definitely now kind of see myself reevaluating some of those things, whether that's to be a better example, to be there for her, or just really like, and again, as we get older, I feel like we kind of cut the, like, we don't have time for the baloney anymore, like we just want to do the stuff that we enjoy doing, that fulfills us, that makes us happy. But then also, right, usually that comes with doing something productive and good for our society and community and all of those things. So I definitely feel, and maybe, so it's hard for me to say, is that just as we're getting older and more experienced, or is it, like inherently also, I think, attributed partially to our children and how they view things and how that affects how we, view things as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's probably both and a bit, right? If we look at kind of stages of development that include adult development from a psychology background. There is this period that happens, kind of lines up biologically when you're having kids, of productivity, of generativity versus stagnation, right? So what are we going to add to the world versus are we going to stay where we are? And I think we come to that as adults regardless of whether we have kids. So it's not a parents do this and non-parents somehow fail here. I think everybody comes to this, to that piece of it at some point in their lives.
So I think one of the more nuanced words that we're speaking of today is superpower. And I don't want to be the naysayer in the conversation, but so I was thinking about blurred lines, right? So I find myself hot spotting my phone and the pickup line, and getting out some emails, a piano lesson, on a Zoom call, while the kids are in their respective music rooms, and evening hours, right? Like doing this board meeting, or all of the bleed that's happening between being a parent and my work life. And I don't always feel super powerful in those moments. And I guess it's, that's the nuanced part of it, right? It's like a superpower for other people, right? Like, wow, look at everything she's accomplishing and doing. And that's amazing. She's, like working everywhere she goes, and, also being a parent. But then I feel sometimes it takes, it has like a little bit of a mental load on me, right? So I don't personally feel super powerful. I don't know if you have thoughts about how these blurred lines, and especially with your family, I'm sure as it kept growing, you had even more and more of those blurred lines.
Yeah, I think, and I love, Risha, how you express like that can look like a superpower from the outside, and my inside experience is I'm just spread too thin, and it's uncomfortable. Because I think that's something that is so common that I hear in my office, with my therapy clients, with my coaching clients, and that people feel alone in it. And the reality is, I think that's part of the experience of being a working parent is I am spread pretty thin, and I feel like I'm failing at everything rather than achieving everything, right? Like I don't feel like this accomplished working parent who's just kicking butt at work and at home. I feel like I'm dropping balls left and right, and I can't get my act together. And so I say that first, just to like normalize the experience, right? If people are listening to this and feeling like, I can't, I hate that I'm on a Zoom call doing my kid's piano lesson or whatever, and I'd rather have these like more kind of strict boundaries. You're definitely not alone in that. And I do think, separate from parenting, COVID really forced our hands a bit with that, right? It's almost like, because work came home with us during COVID, it's almost like impossible to detangle it now, right? So again, even colleagues and clients that do not have kids, I think, have that experience of like, well, I'm on vacation, but I can take this Zoom call, so maybe I'll just take it rather than reschedule it, or I can be accessible 24/7, so I just am. So I think there's some non-parenting pieces. But the reality is, when you're a parent, right, there's just so many more things that you're trying to squeeze in. And, it makes me think a little bit of, I know you guys did the episode last season on the multiple identities, right? And so being a mom or a parent is now one more identity that can feel like it's at odds with scientist or work or whatever. And that we need to start thinking of, okay, well, where do they overlap, and embrace that? And where do they clash a little bit, and acknowledge that's okay. And so it may be things like, the overlap is that role modeling, right? I like talking about where work lights me up and what I'm excited about with my kids, because it models for them that I'm a mom and I have these other interests, and I'm doing things that feel good for me and feel fulfilling. And I get to let them see that. And when there are times where they're clashing, it's about learning boundaries, which I think are really hard, especially, and I'll speak for myself, but I think other people can relate, is like, if you're a high achiever, you don't want to have to say no. I want to do all the things. I hate it. And I know that if I don't, I'm going to drop something that's actually really important to me, or I'm going to be short-tempered and not the mom that I want to be, right? That I have to set those boundaries. And parenting just kind of forces you to learn how to do that, and to tolerate that maybe other people are going to be disappointed in you, and that's okay. Right? That we're just going to have to tolerate some of that.
Yeah, I mean, and we're our worst critics, right? So it's going back to what you acknowledged at the beginning, the external, what people are perceiving versus what we are experiencing within. It's probably that we're harder on ourselves when we're creating those boundaries and, role modeling, right? So especially for, our daughters, right? Because unfortunately, or, it is that women end up taking on more of the parenting responsibilities. And, we're in a generation of high achieving women too, right? So we're in a process, right? And so hopefully for them, this kind of conversation, the role modeling will normalize it so that they aren't so hard on themselves about it.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I just saw a stat the other day that, work even in the families where mom is the breadwinner, they still do 80% of the domestic labor. And, that's one of the things I will work with people on is how do we shift that dynamic in a couple? But there is a reality to, there is simply more to do than you have time to do at this point. And so you got to figure out what you're going to say no to or hand off to someone else.
Yeah. I love all that. And, there are these different dynamics, and we just talked about, right, some of the positives or things that help us at work, right? And while we were just talking about kind of these internal conflicts that we have and how we feel about ourselves, right? I still think that societally there are some of these external factors, right? And so, like, it does specifically being a mom, because we know that there are data differences between being a mom and a dad in terms of success in the job and moving forward. So, like, does being a mom though hurt your promotability?
So I'm going to give you like I'm a psychologist and everything is nuanced answer of yes and because yeah, it does. Not in the way that maybe traditionally we might think of it. There was actually just very recently, I think in the past week, a Harvard Business Review article came out, and it, essentially the title was something along the lines of there's no good age to be a woman at work. And the point was that you're going to hit discrimination no matter where you are. And specifically when it kind of in talking about parenting, the motherhood penalty is paid by women, whether they have children or not, right? The implicit bias is, oh, you're 30 something, you're going to get married and have babies. And so we better not promote you. And that is in people's brains, even though I think they don't realize it. And so you could be out there and say, I'm never getting married, don't want kids, not interested. And you might still not get promoted because of the implicit bias that people carry. And then essentially once you can't have kids, you're categorized as too old. And then that is a whole nother thing that we could do a whole nother episode on. So, I say that not to be kind of doom and gloom, right? But to say the reality is women face discrimination for being women, not just for being parents, right? And you can see that in the kind of fatherhood bonus, right? When men become fathers, they in fact are promoted, and that is looked at as a good thing for their career. It's not about being a mom; it's about being female.
Okay, so then, like, my ultimate thing is, like, how do we change this narrative, right? Like, that parenting and more specifically motherhood, right? Because, like you just said, right, the fatherhood is like the extra, like, good job. Now you show you're like responsible and dependable and blah, 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 right? You can, deal with people better and all of these things. And then it's like the complete opposite for women and for moms. So, like, how do we change the narrative? How do we work with society to show that motherhood is an asset, right? That should be valued, and that, people shouldn't just assume, women are going to have babies and then they shouldn't be considered. But also that when women do have babies, that doesn't mean that they're still not just as capable or more capable, right, than the male counterpart.
Yeah, I think that's the work I'm out here trying to do, right? Is standing on my soapbox and saying, hey, guess what? Like, this is, moms are people too, but more importantly, moms are brilliant people, and moms are scientists, and moms are CEOs, and all of those things. What I do, in addition to my coaching work, I do consulting where I'll come into companies and work with them around what are your policies and what are the policies implicitly saying and what can we change, whether this is a company of 2 people or of 200 people, around supporting and retaining working parents. And I think there are definitely other folks out there in this space kind of saying, hey, here are the leadership lessons that we get from parenting. And people need to be paying attention to this. And I think the other thing is to just promote the bottom line, right? When you don't value working parents, you lose them. And then that actually costs the company money in the end, right? Replacing, especially if we think about women in STEM, right? Women in STEM are highly skilled workers. So that's an expensive replacement to make if you lose a working parent, right? If this person says, I'm, leaving the field altogether, or I'm leaving this company for one that supports me better, you're talking about a year and a half worth of their salary just to replace them, not to mention kind of the lost knowledge and the morale hit to everybody else. It's a financial cost. And so that's kind of another place where I'll put a little push on companies when I'm speaking with them of recognizing that it's hurting you in the long run too.
So I'm curious, Anne, about your consulting. Are companies seeking you out for this purpose, or do you add that in, or, that they want to retain their working parents? Is that something that you're seeing out there?
It's a mix. So I am kind of promoting it to companies as, hey, are you aware that this is a problem? And I have some solutions to fix it. And so it is definitely me kind of selling the idea, and different companies are more or less receptive to it in terms of how they approach it. And I think it's also, helpful, as I do think there's more talk in the ether, if you will, about, the kind of childcare cliff and problems of finding childcare and the realities of being a working parent. And so I think there is just there's a primedness in the air, I think, to hear the message these days.
So just going a little bit off script here. So we've talked about the fertility trap. I think that's what it's called, or the fact that the replacement rate. What is it called? Something of that sort that the U.S. has entered, right? What are your thoughts on that? Like big picture in terms of like what's happening in our society?
In terms of
the younger generation, like not wanting to go into, not wanting to become parents. So I've heard that, part of it is they see us and it's such a, I guess a deterrent to them, right? To want to go into parenting. I don't have the data on that, but that's what, I've read in a couple places.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. And I certainly, again, from the therapist angle, more so in this particular one, have worked with patients who have said, I don't know that I want this because it looks like not very rewarding and a lot of work. And I kind of love my career and I'll pass. And that's fine, right? Again, that's a great choice if you know that that's aligned for you. And then I also have people who say, I want this, and I don't know how I'm going to make that work. And so I'm maybe second guessing whether I'm going to do it. And I think that's where, my hope in advocating that we make shift at a corporate level to how we treat working parents, that then there will be more room for people to choose parenthood who want to. And I would say that it just makes, more room for people to be human. I think that's the bottom line, right? With all of this, I certainly talk about it from a working parent perspective, but the reality is we all have lives outside the office, right? And even if we're not caring for kids, we may be caring for parents or a sick spouse, or we may just have something really cool we do outside of work that takes a lot of our time, and we want to put time into that other thing. And that other thing makes us a better employee too, or a more engaged employee. And so it is really this big picture of, can we create, a culture of care at work where we're allowed to be humans and have things going on outside of work and have our attention pulled in multiple directions and have that be okay, because that's the only way that any of us are going to sustain meaningful careers over time.
Yeah, I love all of this, right? Because at the end of the day, I love being a mother. I think it's the biggest accomplishment of my life. It's probably going to be the thing I'm most proud of, in spite of, like all the other accolades that we get from our profession, right? That's my favorite thing that I've done, right? So So we love this conversation because hopefully it makes people think of it differently, right? Both for the women that are listening, and then, also for other people from the outside, realizing that parenting can be such an asset, right? In terms of all of the things, the 4 Ps, right? That you brought up. So we have one last question for you. I know we mentioned your website already. How can our listeners get in touch with you, connect with you?
Yeah, so they can definitely go to the website. I've got information there about my coaching and my consulting. I'm also launching a group working mothers support coaching program in January 2024. So people can get information about that. They can reach out to me via email, and then you can find me at LinkedIn. It's just Dr. Ann Welsh, or on Instagram at dr.welsh.coaching. And I try to be pretty active and responsive on both of those platforms too. So I'm happy to hear from people if you have questions or thoughts on the episode, or want to continue this conversation, or want to connect about anything else.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a lot of fun, so thank you for having me.
Thank you for always
listening.
Just always listening to us.
On and never hit stop. Listen to us all day.
I love it. Thank you as always for listening. Support WISEcast with a monthly donation to ensure great quality future episodes. Or you can donate to our cause using PayPal. Both are linked in the episode notes.
And don't forget to share WISEcast with all of your friends. I am Dr. Richa Chandra.
And I'm Dr. Amber Mella.